Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. Today is Monday, May 6th, 2024, and I'm the host of the show, Cara Santa Maria. And as always, I want to thank those of you who make Talk Nerdy possible. Remember, Talk Nerdy is and will always be 100% free to download, and the way we make that happen is by relying on individual support of folks just like you. We've just finished 500 episodes. Here's to 500 more. I want to thank all of you for your wonderful comments, questions for the last episode, which was that 500th AMA, but also for the lovely comments and notes that I've received since it aired. They've been really, really heartwarming, and I'm just so grateful. So yeah, let's give a big thank you to my top patrons this week. They include Anu Baravaj, Daniel Lang, David J.E. Smith, Mary Neva, Brian Holden, David Compton, Gabrielle F. Jaramillo, Joe Wilkinson, Pasquale Gelati, Ulrika Keith, Riva Keith, and Ulrika Hagman. Thank you all so very much. All right, so this is a fun one for you because this is an old friend of mine who I was able to convince to come on my show. Her name is Alex Stapleton, and she's an Emmy award-winning director and producer. She founded the production company House of Nonfiction to develop and produce film, television, and other storytelling and experimental formats. And she's made all sorts of really, really wonderful films. A Prime Video documentary called Reggie about baseball player Reggie Jackson, an A&E documentary, Corman's World, Exploits of a Hollywood Rebel, the Netflix documentary, Hello Privilege, It's Me, Chelsea. So many good things. Let's see. FX's Pride. She was a showrunner and executive producer there. And also Showtime's Shut Up and Dribble and Netflix's The Playbook, among others. But today, we're going to primarily focus on her newest documentary, which is one part of a three-part, a trilogy on HBO called God Save Texas. She directed the second installment, God Save Texas, The Price of Oil, where she talks about the energy industry's impact on the Black community, told through her own lens as a native Texan, a native Houstonian, actually. And this was premiered at the 2024 Sundance Film Festival and released on HBO and Max back in February. So if you have the opportunity, you've got to check it out. Also, I want to plug really quickly that she has an upcoming documentary called How Music Got Free, which is planning to stream on Paramount Plus early in the summer. And this is a documentary all about that story of digital piracy groups. If you guys remember, it's fascinating and you've got to check it out. Alex is a friend of mine from several years ago when we worked together at PBS here on a kind of a local Los Angeles focus show about issues facing Angelenos. So yeah, so much here. And I'm just so thrilled to have had the opportunity to chat with her. So without any further ado, here she is, Alex Stapleton. Well, Alex, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you.
Yeah, I'm so excited that we were able to make this work and that I'm able to talk to you about all of the really interesting film projects that you've been up to lately, especially one of your newest projects, God Save Texas, The Price of Oil. But before we dive into this documentary, I just want to catch up a little bit. So you are a director, a filmmaker, and I first met you when we worked together way back when at PBS and KCET here in Los Angeles, where I am currently stationed. That's a weird way to put it. I'm not in the military, where I'm currently living and working. Because we worked together on a show called SoCal Connected. So back then you were working as also a reporter. How often do you do on-camera work? Was that like a weird departure for you, or have you always kind of done that too?
Well, what's funny is I haven't really done it since then. I did one other show called Take Part. Oh yeah, Take Part. That was
Yep.
also like we weren't
Yep.
on that show at the same time, but that's also our crossover. And every time I'm on camera, I feel like it's by like default. Like something crazy goes down and it's like, oh, I have to be on camera to make the story make sense.
Okay.
So that's this is the third time, and I don't do it often. And me being on camera for God Save Texas was definitely not how this project started. It was something that happened once we got into it, and it was really because of shooting during COVID and the story just totally turning on its head and becoming something, this very personal story.
Right. So it was obviously, I mean, you directed this story but it was really personal. It was your story. And so it does make sense that you brought the viewers into your family and that you kind of brought us along for the journey. And so let's talk a little bit about the series as a whole first, and then we can maybe get into your specific, I guess, episode. Is
Mm-hmm.
that what you would call it?
Film
Okay.
episode. They're calling it a trilogy. So
Okay. Yeah. Okay, cool. So it's a three-part documentary series.
Mhm.
And so tell me a little bit more about I guess the big picture, the executive producers and like sort of how the whole thing started.
Yeah. Well, the whole series came to fruition thanks in part to Alex Gibney, who is a documentary, a genius, a legend, someone who's been in making documentaries for decades now, and is just a really spectacular filmmaker. He has a long-standing relationship with an author, Lawrence Wright, Texas-based author. And Lawrence and Alex have partnered in the past on a number of documentaries based on Larry's books, and about Scientology and about Afghanistan and a myriad of different subjects. But Larry wrote God Save Texas as a book first, and I think the story is that when he took it to Alex, Alex was like, I'm a New Yorker, and so I don't think I'm the appropriate filmmaker to try to, turn this into a series. So the quest began to find Texas-based filmmakers that could try to adapt what Larry wrote about into a documentary project. Of course, they took that to HBO, one of my favorite places to work for and HBO really understood and agreed with that mission to find Texas-based filmmakers. So the first filmmaker to join the project was Richard Linklater, Texas-based, very famous scripted narrative, director who's won Oscars and is an amazing filmmaker. But Rick had never done a documentary before, so this kind of became, an experiment for him. And I think when Rick joined the project, he's really close to Larry, also knew Alex. And I think that was the first episode or film, to be shot. And it also just organically turned into a story that was very, deeply personal to Rick. I guess I should just rewind to set up the context of what the book was about. God Save Texas is actually a prayer. And Larry wrote the book to explain the culture, politics, economics, the way of life of Texas, and us as Texans, to the rest of the country. And I think his thesis is that America as a country, we've always had states that kind of lead the charge. New York with Wall Street, or California with the entertainment industry. And Larry's point is that the state of Texas is really kind of becoming, for better or for worse, the experimental ground for all of these hot topic issues that the country really cares about. Border control, climate control, women's rights, energy, like all of these topics are prison, mass incarceration, the prison system. And Texas is a state that kind of embodies all of these different issues. And the state has basically become, probably for conservatives, definitely for conservatives, a way for them to create policies and figure out how to, get what they want in the state of Texas. And then the blueprint is created that the rest of the country will follow. So the book goes into all of these different areas of conversation, but the book is also semi-autobiographical about Larry, and he's from Dallas, and it kind of follows, his life. So when Rick joined the project, Rick is from Huntsville, and Huntsville is very famous because it has, one of our biggest prisons there, and the whole town, or it's a small city. Prison is the main industry of Huntsville. And growing up there, I think, the Rick wanted to talk about, what is it like to be from a hometown where prison is the industry, and to have like an honest kind of portrait of that, an honest conversation about it. And that film, they shot that before I even got involved, and it went really well. And then the next phone call, I interviewed for it. I got it. I met with Larry. I had already read his book, actually.
Oh, really? Before the
yeah.
project? Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And it really touched me because, you're still currently a Texan in exile. But
Yes.
I was a Texan in exile. I was living in LA, and that's when we met. And I left Texas when I was 18 years old, and I never, ever, ever wanted to move back. I couldn't wait to get out of the state. I thought that it was way too conservative for me. I had no interest in living in Texas. And so I went to New York and then California. So reading the book.
That's so funny. That was my exact.
That was your journey.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why we get along.
Exactly.
But reading that book was like, it was the first thing I had ever read that really kind of articulated my love-hate relationship with the state of Texas. And like this,
it's so funny. Yeah. So many of us have that too.
Yeah.
Like I have a massive Texas tattoo on the back of my arm.
I know.
And
I remember.
When people it's like when people talk shit about Texas, I get defensive, but then I talk shit about Texas all the time. You know what I mean?
It's like a sibling. It's like, or a family member. It's like,
yeah,
I can talk shit about Texas.
Yes.
You can't, because you didn't, you don't have the badge of honor. You're not from there,
Yeah.
It's so weird because, we can be, you're from Dallas, right?
Yeah, I'm from like the burbs around Dallas.
Yeah, and I'm from Houston, two different worlds.
Totally.
Doesn't matter where you're from in the state. Like most of us have like a really complex relationship with the state. And so I was excited. When I met Larry, we chatted. He was really excited that I was from Houston. A big part of the book was talking about the oil industry and how the oil industry has really shaped a lot of the culture of the state. And obviously given the state a lot of money. And so, we just hit it off, and my son's name is Beaumont. So I think he was like, perfect. Yeah, you're hired.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning.
Well, and your story goes in a whole layer deeper because, of course, you're not, a white man from Texas. You're a Black woman from Texas. And your family's relationship with oil is incredibly complex. Your family's relationship with oil is incredibly fraught. And so your story, I'm curious, before you started to dig deep to make this documentary, how much did you know, and how much did you have to uncover to tell this story?
I definitely knew, like on a surface level, like what the background was. I knew that I always knew, and I wore it, like, a badge of honor. I was like, I'm very Texan. My family goes back 7 generations. So I knew that part. I knew we had been here for a really long time, which is not what people always think about because it's my Black family. And as a Black person and with a giant Black family in this state, I think when people think about families, legacy families that have been here for so long, you think of like white cowboys. So I knew that part. When I started the project, it really got off the ground with Larry and I talking about. It was much more of a macro survey, I want to say, about the oil industry, and the point was going to be showing the rest of the country, like, this is how energy happens. This is Houston is ground zero for how we're a big part of how you're able to have energy, to have oil and gas, and Larry was really into trying to explain, the history of Spindletop, where oil was first discovered in the state, to like the Permian Basin, which is all of West Texas, and how oil and gas comes from that area, from that region, and then gets, shipped under all these like underground pipelines into Houston, and also gets shipped out, all over the country. And that's where we started. And so I met up with him. I was living in LA. I came out for like a couple of weeks, the beginning of 2020, in January of 2020. And we met and we started interviewing, all of these, professors and scientists and politicians, just all of these people that have an opinion about the oil and gas industry. And I learned a lot that I did not know. But what happened was COVID hit, and
it's like following your timeline. I'm like,
yeah,
and
it was
then,
it was crazy. Like I remember like we were taking these meetings, and I remember, as many Americans remember, before it really hit us here, like, especially in New York, you were hearing all these stories about in Italy and obviously in China. And it just felt like it was getting closer and closer, but, was it real? Like what, how bad was it going to be? And Larry and I had a full day meeting with a bunch of people, and we went to dinner, and I got a hit on my phone, a news story that broke, and it was like the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo is canceled. And I was like, okay, like literally it was like, Houston, we have a problem. Like for the for the city of Houston to shut down the Livestock Show and Rodeo, that's a really big deal, because that never gets canceled. So and then we went into a lockdown. This is like now, like, early to mid-February. And I was staying with my mom, and I was still prepping for this oil story with Larry on the phone and over Zoom. But then as I was getting more embedded with the history of oil and gas in the state, I was like, well, where are all the Black people in this story? I was like, where? Because I know that we've been here for a long time, and it just started to, like, the light bulb kind of went off in my head. And then I started talking to my mom, and my mother was, she's been doing genealogy on our family for decades. And she was so excited to share with me, well, let me take you back to like our origin, story in this state. And then I talked to Larry about it, and I was like, this is kind of becoming like this very weird, there's something here to, I was like, Larry, there's no Black people in this story. And
right.
That's like weird to me. And he was like, yeah, that's that's a thing. That's disturbing. And he really thought that because of my like deep history in the state, my family ties here, he was like, I think that we should talk about the omission of Black people, in the oil and gas story. And so there was something there. And then the flip side of that became, understanding the impact that oil and gas has from an environmental
Right. Even till
standpoint.
today, like even
Exactly.
right now. Yeah.
Exactly. And while COVID was happening, there were some like crazy things that were going on in a neighborhood that a lot of my extended family still lives in, called Pleasantville, which is on the east side of town. And there was like they were having problems with their water and the safety of their water because of some sort of spill, some nebulous reason that like nobody really understood. And then it just really started to click. I was like, okay, so we aren't really a part of the oil and gas story about the like heyday, the money, the great American dream, all what the wildcatters came here to do. We weren't allowed to be a part of that. However, all of Black and brown communities in the city of Houston are pretty much in the part of town that's closest to the ship channel, and it just was so pervasive, like what these communities have to deal with and go through from an environmental standpoint of what they're being exposed to, being so close to facilities and these petrochemical companies and these storage bins and just all of this stuff. And so that that's a very long answer, but that was the genesis of how the story kind of came to light.
It just must have been so, I mean, from the outside, it's easy to say fascinating. Obviously, living it, there's so many more complicated adjectives that come into this. There must have been a lot of, it must have been tinged with quite a lot of pain as well. But like, as I'm watching this, I'm pretty sure that I watched it like a day after or a day before I watched Killers of the Flower Moon. Yeah, and I remember feeling a lot of like and noticing a lot of parallels of this sort of like white colonial like, experience of like oil barons and kind of coming into these areas where, Black families could have very well owned that land and reaped the benefits. And in Killers of the Flower Moon, of course, these indigenous people, in some respects, did own the land and actually did have more rights, but were still sort of tricked and scammed out of it. And so I don't know. I saw a lot of parallels there, and then I just remember noticing the experience of like you were there learning from your relatives, and they were sharing their stories with you in the midst of this global pandemic. And, I'm thinking about all of the public health tragedies that are just completely impacting Black and brown communities orders of magnitude worse than white communities. And just thinking about kind of the sort of systemic and institutional problems that today are kind of not different than they were, as you said. Was it 7 generations ago that your family goes back? And even though, obviously there's only so much you can touch on in a documentary, all of these issues are raised as you're watching. They all were coming up for me as I'm watching this. It's so complex.
It's so complex, and there's not like an easy answer to it. And I think that's the kind of like the quagmire, like we all use oil and gas and fossil fuel to do what to for the way we live our lives, to travel, to get your Amazon packages delivered to you, like to the materials that, are in your cell phone. It's everywhere. But there's a major problem with this industry being so unregulated, and I just wanted to show like one tiny sliver, through the lens of my family of like the human cost, that is being paid for that. And I think if you don't, in this country, I think the term fence line community, I don't even think that everyone understands what that means. And I think if you do understand, or you've heard that term before in like a presidential debate, you don't realize, like this is literally like on the other side of the fence there's or underneath their soil, like there's like it's so contaminated. And I think that most people are like, well, just move, or like, why are you there anyway? People don't, they can't draw they can't connect the dots to understand that, oil and gas came after, the majority of these communities were created. Um, and I
And what
think,
a privilege to say, like, just move.
yeah, yeah, just move.
Like,
Yeah, it's
come
like, well,
on.
where am I going to go
Yeah.
exactly? When my family's been here for for 3 generations or 2 generations or whatever, or I spent all of my money buying this house because no one told me, that it was so dangerous. And I think that was something I'd never really processed. Probably, I think that the other really big thing as a Texan, the state of Texas has done a really amazing job at marketing and like PR. They have done such a good job. These oil companies are everywhere. They sponsor like all the sport. Just everything. Like in this town has really been built from like oil and gas money,
Yeah.
and
And they make it cheap. Let's be fair. It's easy to live there.
yeah, it's easy. It's easy to live here. The universities in this state, that comes from oil money. There's so much of a connection of like things that are actually really good for society, that are built using using the money that comes from fossil fuel. And so I think because of that, there has historically been this like way of thinking, especially in Houston, like, well, don't bite the hand that feeds you. Like hey, like it's not that bad, or it's like, look, it's a necessary thing. It's a necessary evil that we have to kind of have here. And I think a lot of people live in Houston. If you live on the west side of town, you probably don't even know. Like, you probably have never even seen what these petrochemical complexes look like on the east side of town. Because if you could be a family, a nice little suburban family on the west side of town, and you wouldn't really even have a reason to go to the east side. So I think that for me, it's like I knew that I knew that that there was a presence here, but I never really thought of like the environmental impacts. Even moving out of Texas, I never really thought about my hometown or my family being in harm's way. It's like, oh, we all have asthma. That's just normal, or yeah, there's chemical explosions like all the time, like once a month. Grew up like that, like not a big deal, like
It's
you
so
never
interesting.
think
It's
about
like,
it.
yeah, it's like I think about the parallel, and I know that this is going to sound out of left field, but like, whatever, it comes from my psychology kind of work. But I think about the parallel when I work with kids who experience like adverse childhood experiences like trauma or abuse. And like when a child grows up in an abusive home and something is so normalized, it's all they
Yes,
know. And
yes,
so it takes them leaving and being around a healthy family unit to be like, "Oh my god,
yes,
I didn't
exactly,
know, like, daddy wasn't supposed to be, like, hovering in my room all the time," or, whatever the case
exactly.
may be. It
You're
takes a while to, like, deprogram that.
You're totally right, and I
Yeah.
didn't realize how programmed I was. I mean,
Mhm.
I grew up in the '80s and '90s in Texas, in Houston, and the football team, it was the Houston Oilers. like,
Mhm.
like you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
oil
yeah.
is so like embedded in like it's a good thing.
Yeah, it's, like, on the back of the uniforms, It's,
Yeah,
like, sponsored by
yeah,
whatever. Yeah, you're right. It's
yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah, my starter jacket, like back in the like that was
Yep.
everything to me. Like, it's a part of the culture. And it wasn't until coming home and doing this film that I really started to like it was like, holy shit, like this is insanity. And what's
Mhm, like,
insane
really
about it,
critically reviewing it. Yeah.
yeah, and it's crazy what industry has been allowed to get away with, by Austin, by the governor and state politicians. There really isn't oversight, and when there's explosions or when things happen, when bad things happen, because they happen all the time, because there's no regulation. they're just, they're slapped on the wrist and given, a small little fine. But these are multi-billion-dollar companies. Like when you fine them $200,000 or, even $2 million, like that's nothing. And so it just, and then I started realizing, oh, I have lots of family members that work, in the refineries, that they're now getting those types of jobs. And the stories I would hear, I mean, it was damn near impossible to even get people to go on camera to explain to me what they were seeing at work, because they were so scared to lose their jobs, to say anything. And that's ridiculous.
Because there's no other industry for them.
Yeah.
Like, what are they going to do if they get blackballed?
Yeah. Yeah. Because word travels, and, a lot of these, I mean, it's not just men anymore, it's men and women. A lot of these folks are, from blue collar backgrounds, maybe they didn't go to college, maybe they did a little bit of college. They have families, they're just trying to put food on the table, and they're making pretty good money, at these refineries. But again, it's like, well, at what cost? I had a couple of family members actually pass away. Well, I had a number of family members pass away during making this. The ones that are in my family that are in the film, like COVID related, but I actually had a really close uncle who passed away, who worked in the refineries his whole life, and he kept fighting cancer. And everyone like that he worked with, they all have died of cancer. And to connect that dot, it's like in making this, I wanted him to be a part of it, and he just he wouldn't go on camera, and he didn't really believe me. It was kind of like, I've worked here for 40 years, and I this company has been so good to me, and they would, it's just, I think it was too painful to even admit that, like, they don't really care about you. Interestingly enough, this is on my white side of my family, because I have, I'm mixed, and I really wanted. At one point, I was trying to compare, like the white side of my family to the black side of my family, and it just, it was like failure to launch. Like I couldn't get anyone on that side to talk about like their employment. But it was just, there's a lot of conditioning that goes on here, and I feel like I'm different because I did go to New York and I lived, in California, and there's a lot of problems with both of those states. Don't get me wrong, lots of problems, but California is, if you live on the beach in California, you're not really worried about your water being super contaminated by, like, petrochemicals, or, there's differences, right? It's the Hermosa Beach is not the ship channel.
Right. But I think there's something really humbling and beautiful about the journey that you made back home, because I do think that sometimes those of us who left Texas, like I'm a Texan in exile, as you mentioned, we can sometimes get a little bit haughty living out here on the coasts, and we can, be a bit holier than thou. And like you said earlier, which was such a critical point, we still rely on oil and gas.
Yes.
So it's very easy to sit out here and go, burn it to the ground, and how dare they? And oh my God, how could anybody, work in these industries? Well, you know what? These are unsung heroes, because I'm putting fuel in my car and I am turning the lights on in my home. And I used to get a little bit irritated. Like, I've actually worked with some petrochemical companies before. I've worked as a science communicator for most of my adult career until I went back to school and became a psychologist. And I've done some work with some petrochemical companies with some of their SciComm initiatives, like, doing some work with children, helping do educational stuff around whatever, doesn't matter. And I really struggled, like, is this greenwashing? Am I selling my soul to the devil? All the things that you do when you take money from pharma companies or oil and gas companies. And I really, really struggled. And I remember thinking, like, I'm sitting here, I'm interviewing a scientist. This is a scientist that they have employed. It's not an evil corporate robber baron. It's a scientist who, yes, is employed by an oil and gas company, but it's not a billionaire corporate oil and gas executive. It's a scientist who went to school and studied petrochemical science. I think we sometimes have to remember these are also people. And yes, there are probably some very bad people working for some of these companies, making decisions that are quite harmful. And then there are hardworking human beings earning a living, keeping the lights on in our homes.
Absolutely. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, there's a paradox in Texas, right? But there's also a paradox, on the coasts, and there's a paradox of California. And it's that, you tend to find people that are very green and want, want to get into renewable energies and, are driving around and, back in the day, maybe in a Prius, now they're in a Tesla, that's a whole nother thing.
Right, exactly.
At this point. But that's another Texan story for another day. But and they just judge the state, for things that I'm not proud of, right, and things that I'm actively trying to fight against.
Of course.
Which is, the governor and this regime controlling things in the state and allowing these companies to just get away with whatever they want. But at the same time, we're all no one is really having the complex conversation of well, until we find another energy source, until it's all nuclear or whatever it is, this is our reality.
And very often these are the people who are anti-nuclear, let's be honest. But anyway, exactly. I know. I digress.
Exactly. Yeah. It's nothing, what do we do with a world full of billions of people, that need energy? And I think that that's the complicated conversation that unfortunately just gets, watered down on both sides, right? To tweets or, bylines on CNN, and that's cool, to a certain degree, but this is a really complex conversation. Like most of our problems in this country, it's not black or white. And I think that this series, God Save Texas, what all of us were really trying to do, everyone who was a part of it, every single human that was a part of making this series, we weren't trying to answer the question, but we were trying to inform really people outside of the state.
Yeah.
There's a human face to all of it.
That's it right there. That's it. None of us wants to see how the sausage is made.
Exactly.
But the truth of the matter is there are people involved in that process, and those people are whole ass people.
Yes.
And you humanized the process of the sausage being made. It's hard. And I think we very often, especially those of us on the coast, are privileged enough to pretend like it's made by magic.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's made by people, hardworking people.
On another planet on Mars. It's right here. And
it's our privilege that actually dehumanizes the process. And what we it's so funny. It's in our sort of liberal privilege, what we're doing is the very thing that we think we are fighting against, but we are dehumanizing people.
Yeah. Yeah. And, if you want to get active, if you want to understand, that's the big humbling thing that I've learned coming back home is there are so many people on the ground that have spent their whole lives fighting against these systems, and why not embed yourself to understand the real way to fight up against it, because you have a more, you have a better understanding of what the impact is versus just being a part of this, crazy argument that is in media, because that is not that's we need less of that and more people outside of the state of Texas understanding, kind of the basic human rights that are being violated and the basic things that we can do to change it right now, and to put protections in place there's the basic right that, a citizen of Houston, Texas, in the United States of America should be able to know like what is being stored next to them. They should be able to, so that they can make the choice. If they have the privilege to make that choice and to leave, or to buy that property, like people should this should all be transparent information, and currently it's not. And that's probably one of the things that's the most upsetting to me. People should understand that the government bodies that are in charge of this, it's the Railroad Commission, and that's weird, right? Like, why
That's
is it called the
super
Railroad
weird.
Commission? Well,
Yeah.
it's because they don't care about updating it, because they don't want to call it the Oil and Gas Commission, because then people would, it would be more obvious as to what they're
Yeah.
not doing or what they are doing or who they're taking money from. But if you call it the Railroad Commission, and you're using an outmoded term like that, most people in this state and around the country would be like, they have nothing to do with oil and gas, and they kind of
Right.
have
So there must
everything
not
to
be
do
a
with it.
problem.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So it's just little things like that, that I don't really get into the weeds in my film about, but I hope that the film is just, it kind of is it's like, come to the table, have like an entree, excuse me, have an appetizer with us, just to like to cleanse your palate of like what you think this debate is about. Let me just show you how complicated it is, and hopefully you'll choose to to plug in and do more. And the one of the other big issues that I have is that when we're having conversations about renewables or policy changes or anything, we're not really inviting fence line communities to the table to talk about those things.
Of course not. We're
Yeah.
inviting people. This is such the like. I mean, I do think it's just deeply entrenched in colonialism, but we're inviting people to talk on the behalf of the people
Yes.
whose voices should actually be amplified.
Yes. Yeah.
It's
And I think
so our way.
it was eye opening even for me to like talk to my family. I've never ever in my life until making this film have sat down with my family members and gone like, what notice did you get from the city of Houston about what contaminants we have like in our family's home? That wasn't dinner table conversation. Um, and for one of my aunts, Barbara, I was just floored by the fact that like she has been paying attention like this whole time as a mom and as a grandmother, and she's a great grandmother when she has her own health problems. She has been really active and has been really paying attention to like what's going on, and she goes to the civic meetings, she goes to the to the city council meetings, she's trying to like figure it out and to like raise her hand, but you know it's like it was like this weird thing for my family to like for us even as a family to kind of go, oh yeah, we should, like as a family we should be having this conversation a lot more.
Right. Right.
We should have each other's backs, and that was really fascinating, and humbling, for me as well.
Yeah, isn't that interesting that sometimes we're like some of us are like organizing within our community, some of us are so overwhelmed that we don't have the bandwidth, but we're not always organizing within our own families.
Yeah, it starts at home. Like,
Right.
really, so that was a big lesson. I mean, look, I stayed home. I finished this and I was like, how, after what I've done and what I've seen and what I've been able to like understand about like where my craft, like what I can do with my own craft, um, I can't leave, like I'd rather stay here and plug in to create change than, to be anywhere else,
Can I
honestly.
ask, and obviously you can like abstain from answering if it's like too much, but like what has it been like for you readjusting to life there? Like, I cannot imagine going back and, like, resettling into I'm just, I don't maybe I'm not there yet, maybe I'd never be there, I don't know, but it feels like a lot.
One day you're going to be back here and I'm going to remember when you had, no, it's been a wild ride. I cannot tell you, I never, ever, ever saw myself moving back to Texas. It's been challenging. It was moving back, especially during COVID, and making this. And I was shooting a couple of other things, oddly enough, in Houston. So it was just weird. I was making God Save Texas. I'm doing another project on George Floyd, and came back home and started working on that. And then I was doing another film with Reggie Jackson, and he was embedded with the Astros. And I was like, wow, like the universe is trying to tell me something. Uh, I mean, it's not. I'm not like happy or proud of some of the things I'm documenting because it's really tragic. But I realized like, wow, I make documentaries. I've done all these stories. I've reported on things that, in the social justice space, or like in talking, shining a light in the little way that I can on issues that I think more people should be talking about. And then I realized this is in my own, this is in my own backyard. Like this is all of this stuff, a lot of what I'm talking about exists in the state of Texas. And this is kind of a ground zero, for a lot of these issues. And so being here has been, it's been every emotion. I've definitely had my moments of being extremely frustrated, like missing California in some ways, but then I don't know, I wouldn't trade it for the world. The thing about Houston that's just incredible is, it is, I think now it's like technically become the most international city in the country. Um, if not, it's about to take over New York in doing that. Yeah. So the population here is it fills me up. It's so incredibly diverse. People all over the world, are here as immigrants, and just and have been here for a while. It's just like a giant like mashup of so many different cultures, and then it's interesting because it's like all of these cultures and all of these people from all over the world kind of taking on a Texan identity, and it's really cool. I hope though that we can start to like rebrand what a Texan identity means, and work on that. But yeah, I love it here. I mean, the food is amazing. My son goes to a language immersion school. He's learning Arabic. We're not
very cool.
Arabic. I mean, I have no lineage in my blood, but I'm like, wow, he can go to school for free and learn Arabic. Like, this is crazy. There's nothing like that in New York or LA. And that's because the population, there's just so many different types of people here. So I've found my footing. I feel so blessed to be with my family. And I feel like I took for granted, that my mom would always be here, and that, the elders in my family, I'd always be able to come back, over Thanksgiving and Christmas and like hang out with them. And you're not promised tomorrow. And I just think even for my son who's 7, I love that I'm exposing him to like, to just a very, complex, awesome, world where he's introduced to like people from so many different socioeconomic backgrounds, and I think people don't realize that the cities in Houston are pretty liberal, they're pretty blue.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like most states, the cities are quite metropolitan in Texas, and I don't know if this is unique to Texas or if it's just like because it's our experience, we are sort of reminiscing on it, but like your experience is similar to mine in that my family unit in Texas is quite strong. Like I'm the one who left.
Yes.
You know what
exactly.
I mean? Like all my family is in Texas and they remain there and they are very connected there. And I'm the one who left.
Yeah.
And maybe it's like that for most people across the country.
I don't know.
I don't know if it's necessarily a Texas thing, but it definitely feels like Texas strong.
Yeah. Yeah, Texans don't leave, and
I
you
know, right?
usually are the one that leaves. And if you leave, you go away and you always come back home. That's why I'm like, I'm going to be very curious to see in 10 years if you're still in California. But the state will get you. Like there's only a handful. Like I feel like Australia is kind of like that. Like Australians do their like walkabout, like like they
Yeah.
go around the world and you'll meet like Aussies doing that. Israelis travel like extensively, but then they always go home, and Australians always go home. I mean, there's certain cultures I think that they'll go experiment, but then you always go home. And I feel like Texas, it's a weird place. Like you always come back home. It's so strange. So strange, but
We'll
hopefully that,
see.
yeah, hopefully. But what people were telling me, it's like you could be of great service here, because you've gone and seen like how you've
There
been
is that,
exposed to
yeah.
like a different way, and then you come back and it's like, okay, how do I improve upon like the world that I come from?
It's interesting, yeah. But also I wonder too, because your roots are much stronger than mine. So you are 7 generations back. Like my father is I don't know how many generations back he is, but he is definitely like a multi-generational Texan. Well, actually, that's not true. Both of my parents are children of immigrants. So my father is, I think, 2 generations back in Texas, but my mom is not a native Texan.
Ah,
She's New Yorican.
oh, okay.
Yeah, so she
Oh,
came to
wow.
Texas. I
That's,
know.
you should interview her about the
I
state of
did I did once. Actually, if you go way back, listeners, go way, way back, maybe season, I don't divide my show into seasons, but maybe like year 2 or 3 on Talk Nerdy, I interviewed my mom on the show. I know.
I should have listened to that before. That should have been my homework assignment before.
No,
Yeah,
no.
that would be wild.
I know. It was great. It was great.
Yeah, yeah. The
Anywho.
state, yes.
Yeah. So, gosh, this is okay. I've got to ask you. Oh my gosh, I almost forgot. I cannot wait to hear about what are some of your newest projects. Like, what are you working on right now, and what can we look forward to? Or no, you just premiered a new, maybe not premiered, but you just had a new a show at South by. Yeah.
Yeah. It was the premiere. It's called How Music Got Free. Tonally very different. It's about music piracy and the pirates. Everyone kind of knows the Napster story, right? But this is about the kids that were that created these ecosystems online in the deep dark web that took down the music industry. And Patient Zero is a guy named Del Glover, who's a black man who lives in Shelby, North Carolina, works at a factory by day, and is like a genius pirate, technologist by night. I think that was also a big, it's a very different story. It's fascinating to me. And what I think I was attracted to was coming back home and really telling these like Southern stories, and talking about the South in a way that in a much more like multidimensional way. I think when people talk about Texas or they talk about other Southern states, it's so two-dimensionalized, because unfortunately we get a bad reputation for mostly what a minority of people, the kind of the government like controls. And that's, I'm very ashamed and I'm very pissed off about, the rights that are being stripped away at an alarming speed in the state of Texas. However, I think that we can't only be known for that. People need to start understanding, our contributions and like
Right. The sort of like mass victimization of
yeah,
Southerners is not
yeah,
always the narrative we want to be
exactly.
telling. Yeah.
Exactly. So How Music Got Free was fun. It's not a Texan story, but it's a Southern story. Yeah, it's a really wild ride. It all takes place in the 1990s and 2000s, and Interscope was a partner on the project. Eminem was one of my executive producers, so the soundtrack is amazing. It's very nostalgic. It's fun, but also kind of asks this bigger question of like where art meets technology, and like have we learned our lesson?
Oh, so like when was when was the timeline of this story?
The kind of the where scene in the early internet is where we start.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
Oh
So it's like
gosh. When I
early
can't
mid
wait to
90s.
see this.
Yeah, it's wild. Um, and all the way, kind of up to now and understanding the impact of like what the MP3 did. But yeah, that will be out on Paramount Plus in June, and super stoked about that. Also, the first time I've ever been a part of South by Southwest, and now that I live in
Really?
Texas,
Oh, how fun.
it
I
was
mean,
beautiful.
talk about
And
being back home.
yeah, I'm like, I have arrived. I, I got to be a part of South by Southwest. And and I have another series coming out on HBO at the end of the year about a very famous criminal case, alleged sexual assault case that took place in New York um, in the 1980s.
Oh, interesting. Have you done like true crime, like as a genre? Have you done kind of like this true crime stuff before?
No, I tend to kind of like the true con stories more. So like the pirate
Hmm.
story was a bit more in
Yeah.
that. This though is just it's a gargantuan story, and I really it kind of was played out in the tabloids and then like the 24-hour news cycle back in the day, and I really wanted to kind of, with so much time that has gone by, just present the story in a more factual, calmer way. So very looking forward to that one coming out, and working on a women in hip hop series that I'm also stoked about. Uh, Taking a look back at the past 50 years of women in hip hop.
Oh, that's
So
so cool. You have so many great projects coming
fun things
up.
coming, new things, that will be out in the press soon. But us documentarians, you typically like you just put it out, like unlike the scripted world where it's like Matthew McConaughey read a book and that gets like a press announcement, and it's like
Yeah.
here in docs, it's like they're so hard to make that you just make them and then you
Yeah.
know here's what I made.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. Oh, well, I'm so excited, and I was so thrilled when I saw, I mean, I think I just saw it, like, pop up or no, I think I was seeing some of the press around, God Save Texas sort of trickling out, and then when I
Yeah.
saw it come across on HBO, I was like, "Yes!" And, like, the minute it was available to watch, I watched it, and then I reached out and I was like, "Please let me interview you." So
Thanks.
yeah, so I'm
Great to
so
hear
glad.
from you.
Yeah,
And
I'm so
I
glad
think,
you're available.
yeah, and I think for all of us too, we were like, is anyone going to watch this? Because it's, Texas, and most people don't like us unless you're from the state. And it's been really incredible, like, the national level of attention that it's gotten. I think
Yeah.
coming out in an election year has definitely helped. And I hope that it just continues to have legs, and, us as filmmakers, we can just do what we do, right? Just create a portrait of life, and create more empathy surrounding these issues. The third film is about the border, which I highly recommend as well. Ileana Sosa is the director of that, and she's from El Paso, and it's a deeply just moving film. And it's just for people to remember when you're watching the news, and the our former president is like saying crazy stuff, like why don't you watch God Save Texas and watch like an episode about the border to really understand like how what is going on, and what people are experiencing on the ground there that isn't
Yeah,
charged with rhetoric.
I think it's really disarming for a lot of people, I think anybody who sits down to watch this documentary series, regardless of your preconceived notions, is going to experience a wave of sort of humanity when you sit down. So you may go in with a chip on your shoulder, you may go in already kind of with open arms and a lot of empathy. You may go in sort of with a little bit of like white guilt or a little bit of liberal bias. But whatever you go in with, I think that it's going to soften some of those edges. And that's what's so lovely about it. You're going to come in with like a little bit more perspective and a little bit more empathy. And so it really is. You're right. Like you wonder, are people going to be interested in this? But I think they might they are. It's sort of like I walking into the Alex Jones documentary, right? Like people
Mhm.
who love him or want to go in to like cheerlead for him. People who hate him want to go in to like, you know, spit
Unpack
on
it.
him.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
But like
yeah,
ultimately what ends up happening is that you like feel things.
yeah,
And I think that's what's really important with a documentary series like this is that you're like, oh yeah, people.
yeah. People
People are
at the center
people.
of it all, and
Mhm.
and community.
Mhm.
You know, there's a great community in the state of Texas, and that's probably what we all love about it is this sense of community. And I think the great the challenge and the threat is our a small amount of people that have a lot of power trying to break up our communities and to make us feel like we can't be a community. And that to me is like, I mean, that's why I'm home. Like, this is my community. So
Yeah. Well, everyone, Alex Stapleton, God Save Texas on HBO. Also, keep an eye out for How Music Got Free. And I guess you can find everything at alexstapleton.com. Thank you so much for being here.
thank you. I'm so
A-
happy that we got to connect again.
Yes, me too. And everybody listening, thank you for coming back week after week. I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together to talk nerdy.